Sixel nervously adjusted his protective exoskeleton as he scuttled into the Galactic University's xenobiology lab. The arthropodian exchange student's antennae twitched anxiously, picking up the pheromones of fear and excitement emanating from his classmates. Today was the day they'd all been dreading: project presentations. Now, you might think, oh, come on, how bad could a simple biology project be? Well, dear reader, when your class includes a human from the notorious Deathworld Earth, things tend to get a little spicy. As Sixel took his seat, he couldn't help but notice the empty chair next to him. That's where Sarah, the aforementioned human, usually sat. Her absence only heightened the tension in the room. The last time Sarah was late for class, she had stumbled and covered in some viscous purple goo, casually explaining that she'd had a minor disagreement with a sentient slime mold. The professor had to be sedated. All right, class. Professor Slop's gelatinous form rippled as he addressed the students. Today, we'll be presenting our end-of-term projects on symbiotic relationships in the galaxy. Who would like to go first? The room fell silent. Even the Vorlax twins, usually eager to show off their telepathic presentations, seemed suddenly fascinated by the patterns on the floor. Just as the silence was becoming unbearable, the lab door burst open with a thunderous crash. Sarah sauntered in, grinning from ear to ear, dragging behind her a large, covered cage that emitted ominous growls and scratching noises. "Sorry I'm late," Prof. Sarah chirped, her voice a discordant mix of excitement and nonchalance that sent shivers down the spines of her alien classmates. "Had a bit of trouble with customs. Apparently they're not too keen on letting highly dangerous, possibly illegal life forms through without proper paperwork. Can you believe that?" The professor's chromatic skin shifted rapidly through shades of pale green and sickly yellow. "Ms. Sarah," he burbled weakly, "please tell me you didn't." "Oh, don't worry," Sarah waved dismissively, parking her mysterious cargo at the front of the class. "I've got all the permits now. Mostly. It's fine." Sixel felt his exoskeleton tighten involuntarily. The last time Sarah had said it's fine, half the chemistry lab had to be rebuilt, and the janitorial staff went on strike for a month. So Sarah clapped her hands together, her eyes gleaming with an unsettling excitement. "Who wants to see my project on symbiotic relationships?" A chorus of whimpers and chittering filled the room. Professor Seelup, realizing he had lost control of the situation again, resignedly waved a gelatinous pseudopod. "Very well, Ms. Sarah, please proceed. And may the cosmic forces have mercy on us all." Sarah's grin widened to proportions that would have been physically impossible for most species. She dramatically whipped the cover off the cage, revealing nothing. The cage was empty. For a brief, blissful moment, the class collectively exhaled in relief. Then, Sarah opened her mouth and their hopes were promptly shattered. "Ladies, gentlemen, an assorted non-binary life form," she announced with theatrical flair. "Allow me to introduce you to my little friends, the Terran dust mite and the common household flea." The silence that followed was so profound you could have heard a cork decay. Sarah," Professor Seelup ventured cautiously, "I don't see anything in that cage." Sarah's laugh echoed through the lab, a sound that would haunt the dreams of her classmates for cycles to come. "Of course you don't, Prof. They're microscopic. But don't worry, I've brought along some visual aids." With that, she pulled out a device that looked suspiciously like a weapon of mass destruction but was actually just a high-powered holographic projector. With a few taps, the air above the empty cage flickered to life, revealing a nightmarish landscape that had several students instinctively activating their defense mechanisms. Projected in larger-than-life detail were creatures that defied description. Monstrous arthropods with razor-sharp mouthparts covered in spines and bristles skittered across the display. Beside them, sleek, armored beings with powerful legs coiled to spring, their own mouthparts adapted for piercing and sucking. "Behold," Sarah exclaimed, her voice a mix of scientific excitement and barely contained glee at her classmates' horror. "The mighty dust mite and the humble flea. These little guys have been living alongside humans for millennia, forming a complex symbiotic relationship with us and our environments." Sixel felt his lunch threatening to make a reappearance. "Those live on your planet?" he chittered weakly. "Oh yes," Sarah nodded enthusiastically. "They're everywhere. In our homes, on our pets, sometimes even on us. Isn't it fascinating?" The Vorlax twins, their usual telepathic composure shattered, spoke in unison. "Horrifying is the word you're looking for, human. Absolutely horrifying." Sarah, either oblivious to or reveling in her classmates' distress, continued her presentation with gusto. "Now, you might be wondering, Sarah, how is this a symbiotic relationship? These creatures seem like parasites and you'd be partially right, but here's where it gets interesting." She tapped her projector again, and the image zoomed out to show a human home. Tiny dots representing dust mites and fleas swarmed over every surface. "You see, while these little guys do feed on our dead skin cells, and in the case of fleas, our blood, they also serve a crucial role in our ecosystem. Dust mites, for example, help break down the dead skin and debris that would otherwise accumulate in our homes. They're like tiny janitors." Professor Seelup, who had been slowly oozing towards the door, paused. "That's actually quite intriguing, Ms. Sarah, but surely these creatures must cause health problems for humans." Sarah's eyes lit up with an intensity that made several students instinctively activate their shield generators. Oh, absolutely, Prof. Allergies, asthma, all sorts of fun stuff. But here's the kicker. Exposure to these creatures in small amounts actually helps strengthen our immune systems. It's like a constant biological warfare training program happening right in our homes. The class stared at her in stunned silence, a mixture of horror and reluctant fascination on their varied alien faces. But wait, there's more, Sarah exclaimed, channeling the spirit of every infomercial host who ever lived. Let's talk about how these little guys have shaped human evolution and technology. With another tap of her projector, the holographic display shifted to show a timeline of human history, punctuated by images of increasingly sophisticated cleaning tools and medical advancements. Our constant battle against these microscopic invaders has driven us to develop better sanitation practices, more effective medicines, and even influenced our architectural designs. We've created entire industries around controlling these populations. It's an arms race on a microscopic scale, and it's been going on for thousands of years. Zixel, despite his better judgment, found himself oddly captivated. So you're saying that these terrifying creatures have actually helped your species advance? Sarah beamed at him, causing Zixel to immediately regret asking the question. Exactly. It's a classic example of co-evolution. We've shaped each other's development over millennia. Isn't that amazing? The Vorlax twins exchanged a glance before one of them spoke up. Human Sarah, while we grudgingly admit this is educational, how exactly did you manage to bring live specimens of these creatures to our class? Surely they couldn't survive the decontamination processes. Sarah's grin took on a mischievous quality that sent a shiver through the room. Oh, that's the best part. I didn't need to bring any specimens. They're already here. The resulting pandemonium was nothing short of spectacular. Professor Selup's gelatinous form quivered so violently he nearly lost cohesion. What do you mean, already here?" he burbled, his voice an octave higher than usual. Sarah, clearly enjoying the chaos, casually leaned against her empty cage. "Well, you see, dust mites and fleas are incredibly adaptable. They've been hitching rides on humans as we've spread across the galaxy. In fact, they've probably already established populations on most inhabited worlds, including this very campus." The silence that followed was so profound you could have heard a quark decay again. Then, all hell broke loose. Zixel's exoskeleton went into full lockdown mode, sealing him in a protective cocoon. The Vorlax twins began telepathically screaming, their usually well-coiffed head tentacles writhing in distress. A gaseous entity student expanded so rapidly in panic that they set off the fire suppression system, dousing the entire class in anti-flammable foam. Amidst the chaos, Sarah stood calmly, looking for all the world like a tour guide watching a particularly entertaining show. Now, everyone," she said in what she probably thought was a soothing tone. "It wasn't. There's no need to panic. These little guys have been around you this whole time, and you haven't even noticed." This, predictably, did not help. Professor Selup, making a Herculean effort to maintain some semblance of order, managed to congeal enough to speak. "Miss Sarah," he gurgled, "while your presentation is undoubtedly thorough, I must question the wisdom of informing a class full of non-Terran species about potentially harmful microorganisms in their environment." Sarah had the grace to look slightly abashed. "Oh, come on, Prof, it's not like they're in any real danger. Human microbiomes are generally pretty harmless to other species. Besides, exposure to diverse microorganisms is great for developing robust immune systems. I'm basically doing everyone a favor." The look of utter disbelief on the faces and other sensory organs of her classmates was a sight to behold. A favor. Zixel's muffled voice came from within his sealed exoskeleton. "You call unleashing microscopic horrors upon us a favor?" Sarah rolled her eyes, a gesture that looked decidedly unsettling to most of her alien classmates. "You're all overreacting. Look, I'll prove it's safe." Before anyone could stop her, not that they would have dared to get close enough, Sarah reached into her pocket and pulled out what looked like a small, fuzzy creature. "This is Mr. Whiskers," she announced, holding up the squirming ball of fur. "He's a hamster, another symbiotic friend of humanity, and he's absolutely covered in dust mites." The class recoiled as one, pressing themselves against the far wall of the lab. Even Professor Selup, usually the voice of reason, seemed to be considering the merits of evacuating the entire building. "Sarah," the professor burbled weakly, "please tell me you didn't bring an unquarantined Earth animal into my classroom." Sarah's laugh, which under normal circumstances might have been considered melodious, now sounded positively diabolical to her terrified classmates. "Of course I did. How else could I demonstrate the harmless nature of our microscopic friends?" She held Mr. Whiskers aloft, the tiny creature squirming in her grasp. "See, he's perfectly happy and healthy, despite being a veritable ecosystem of microorganisms." The hamster chose that moment to sneeze, sending a tiny cloud of something into the air. The reaction was immediate and spectacular. The gaseous entity student, who had just managed to recompose themselves after the fire suppression incident, immediately vaporized in panic, setting off every atmospheric contamination alarm in the building. The Vorlax twins, in perfect synchronization, fainted dead away, their telepathic shock rippling through the minds of everyone in a 10-meter radius. Zixel's exoskeleton went into emergency shutdown, ejecting him from the nearest window in a pre-programmed escape maneuver. Professor Selop, showing a presence of mind that would later earn him a commendation from the university board and a mandatory psychiatric evaluation, slammed his pseudopod on the emergency quarantine button. Transparent force fields sprang up around each student, and the lab's air filtration system kicked into overdrive. Sarah, still holding the now very confused Mr. Whiskers, looked around at the chaos with an expression of mild surprise. "Wow, tough crowd," she muttered. "Maybe I should have started with the tardigrades instead." As alarms blared and emergency response teams in hazmat suits began to converge on the Zelmi biology lab, Sarah found herself facing a very gelatinous, very angry Professor Selop. "Ms. Sarah," he burbled ominously, each syllable dripping with barely contained fury. "I believe we need to have a discussion about the appropriate scope of academic projects and the importance of interspecies sensitivity." Sarah, with the unflappable confidence that only a human from a death world could muster in such a situation, simply grinned. "So does this mean I don't get extra credit for the live demonstration?" The professor's reply was lost in the sound of the university's rarely used extinction-level event sirens beginning to wail. 3 hours, 2 complete decontamination cycles, and 1 very stern lecture from the Dean of Xiana Studies later, Sarah found herself sitting alone in the campus cafeteria. Well, not entirely alone. Mr. Whiskers, now safely ensconced in a UN-approved containment sphere, sat on the table next to her half-eaten plate of something that claimed to be pizza, but looked suspiciously like sentient moss. "Well, Mr. Whiskers," Sarah sighed, poking at her food with a fork, "I think we might have overdone it a bit this time." The hamster, showing a wisdom beyond his species, merely twitched his whiskers in what could have been interpreted as agreement. Sarah's contemplation of her academic faux pas was interrupted by the arrival of an unexpected visitor. Zixel, his exoskeleton now sporting several new dents and scratches from his impromptu defenestration, cautiously approached her table. "Oh, hey Zixel," Sarah greeted, trying to sound casual. "How's it going? Nice day for a flight, huh?" Zixel's antennae twitched in what Sarah had learned to recognize as a mix of exasperation and reluctant amusement. "I suppose I should thank you. Human Sarah, I've been meaning to test my exoskeleton's emergency eject function. I just didn't expect it to be under such extreme circumstances." Sarah had the grace to look sheepish. "Yeah, about that. I may have gotten a bit carried away with the whole hands-on-learning thing." Zixel's multifaceted eyes seemed to glimmer with an emotion Sarah couldn't quite place. "A bit carried away? Sarah, half the class is still in quarantine. The Vorlax twins are in telepathic therapy, and I'm pretty sure that Gasis Entity's student is still trying to recondense somewhere in the ventilation system." Despite the gravity of the situation, Sarah couldn't help but chuckle. Okay, I admit it. It was a disaster, but you have to admit, it was an educational disaster, right? Zixel's exoskeleton creaked in what might have been a sigh. "I suppose that's one way to look at it, though I'm not sure trauma was listed in the course objectives." Sarah grinned, some of her usual enthusiasm returning. "Hey, that's the best kind of learning. Nothing sticks in your memory quite like mortal terror, right? You humans have a very unique perspective on education," Zixel chittered. Settling into the seat across from Sarah, his gaze fell on Mr. Whiskers, and he instinctively leaned back. "Is that creature still host to those microscopic horrors?" Sarah rolled her eyes. "Mr. Whiskers is perfectly harmless, I promise." In fact, she paused, a familiar glint appearing in her eyes that made Zixel's exoskeleton tighten instinctively. "Want to hold him?" Zixel's antennae went rigid with shock. Hold the microscopic horror carrier? Sarah, have you suffered some sort of brain damage? Is this a side effect of your planet's high gravity?" Sarah laughed, a sound that still sent shivers through Zixel's carapace. "Come on, it'll be fine. Think of it as immersion therapy. Besides, you're already covered in microorganisms. They're everywhere, you know." That Zixel chittered, his voice rising an octave, "is not as comforting as you seem to think it is." But Sarah was already standing up, Mr. Whiskers' cup gently in her hands. "Here, just let him sit on your… do you have a lap? Or maybe one of your auxiliary appendages?" Zixel found himself at a crossroads. On one hand, every instinct honed by millions of years of evolution on a much less lethal planet than Earth was screaming at him to run, hide, possibly molt his entire exoskeleton just to be safe. On the other hand, well, there was something undeniably intriguing about the tiny furball Sarah was holding. "I suppose a brief interaction couldn't hurt," Zixel found himself saying, much to his own surprise. "But if I start dissolving, I'm holding you personally responsible." Sarah's face lit up with a grin that would have sent most of their classmates running for the nearest escape pod. "That's the spirit. Don't worry, dissolution is extremely unlikely. Probably." Before Zixel could reconsider his moment of madness, Sarah gently placed Mr. Whiskers on one of his flatter appendages. The hamster, seemingly unfazed by its alien perch, immediately began grooming itself. Zixel froze, every sensor in his exoskeleton on high alert. He waited for the burning sensation of microscopic invaders, for the feeling of his carapace beginning to melt. for any sign that this was the beginning of the end. Instead, all he felt was warm and soft and strangely calming. "See," Sarah said softly, watching the interspecies interaction with undisguised glee. "Not so bad, right?" Zixel found himself reluctantly agreeing. "It's not unpleasant," he admitted, "though I still fail to see how this relates to our xenobiology project." Sarah's eyes lit up, and Zixel immediately regretted his words. He recognized that look. It was the same one she'd had right before she'd decided to improve the cafeteria's food synthesizers with earth spices. The resulting culinary chaos had made Galactic headlines. "Oh, my dear Zixel," Sarah said, her voice taking on the tone of a professor about to launch into a lecture. "This is where it gets really interesting. You see, what's happening right now is a perfect example of interspecies symbiosis in action." Zixel's antennae twitched in confusion. "How so?" "I'm not providing any benefit to this, Mr. Whiskers, nor is it benefiting me, unless you count the odd sensation in my neural circuits as a benefit." Sarah's grin widened. "Ah, but that's where you're wrong. You're providing Mr. Whiskers with warmth, safety, and a new experience. In return, he's helping to diversify your microbiome, potentially boosting your immune system, and most importantly, he's helping you overcome your fear of Earth creatures." Zixel considered this for a moment. "I suppose that makes a certain amount of sense, though I'm not sure the University Ethics Committee would approve of using live subjects for such an experiment." Sarah waved a hand dismissively. Details. "The point is, you're experiencing firsthand the kind of interspecies interactions that have shaped Earth's ecosystem for millions of years. Isn't it fascinating?" Despite himself, Zixel found that he was indeed fascinated. The tiny creature on his appendage had settled down and appeared to be napping, its tiny chest rising and falling in a rhythm that Zixel found oddly soothing. "I must admit," Zixel said slowly, "this is not how I expected my day to go when I woke up this morning." Sarah laughed. "Welcome to life with humans, my friend. Expect the unexpected, and always be prepared for a little chaos." As if on cue, alarms began blaring throughout the cafeteria. Red lights flashed, and a computerized voice announced, "Attention all students and faculty. This is not a drill. We have detected an unauthorized Earth-based lifeform in the cafeteria. Please proceed calmly to the nearest decontamination chamber." Sarah and Zixel exchanged a look. "Well," Sarah said, scooping up Mr. Whiskers and depositing him back in his containment sphere, "looks like our little biology lesson is over for now. Race you to decontamination." Zixel, surprising himself once again, felt his mandibles twitch in what passed for a smile among his species. "You're on, human. But this time I'm using the door instead of the window." As they dashed out of the cafeteria, narrowly avoiding a squad of security drones armed with industrial-strength disinfectant, Zixel couldn't help but reflect on the day's events. Yes, it had been terrifying. Yes, it had been chaotic. And yes, he was probably going to need several cycles of therapy to fully process everything. But it had also been exciting, illuminating. Dare he say it? Fun. Perhaps, Zixel mused as he and Sarah dodged panicking students and overzealous cleaning bots. There was something to this human approach to education after all. Danger, disaster, and near-death experiences included. Just as they reached the decontamination chamber, Sarah turned to Zixel with a mischievous glint in her eye. "So same time next week. I was thinking we could cover extremophils. I've got this great sulfur-based lifeform from Venus that I've been dying to show off." Zixel felt a mix of dread and anticipation wash over him. "Cosmos, help me," he chittered. "But I think I'm actually looking forward to it." And with that, they stepped into the decontamination chamber, ready to face whatever new adventures or disasters awaited them in the wild world of interstellar academia. As the decontamination process began, bathing them in a rainbow of supposedly safe chemicals, Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. Sure, she'd caused a minor panic, possibly traumatized half her class, and would probably be facing some serious disciplinary action. But she'd also opened at least one alien mind to the wonders of Earth's ecosystem. In Sarah's book, that was a win. The decontamination cycle finished with a cheery ding, and the chamber doors slid open to reveal a scene of controlled chaos. Emergency response teams were still swarming the cafeteria, armed with scanners and containment units. A group of trembling floatlings huddled in a corner, their usual luminescent glow dimmed to a frightened flicker. And in the center of it all stood Dean Zorix, her tentacles writhing with barely contained fury. Sarah said, her voice a perfect blend of nonchalance and feigned surprise. "Looks like the committee for my extra credit project has arrived." Zixel, still slightly damp from the decontamination spray, shot her a look that managed to convey exasperation, amusement, and resignation all at once. "You know, Sarah, most species would consider this an optimal time to engage in an activity known as shutting up." Sarah grinned. "Where's the fun in that? Besides, this is a perfect opportunity for a practical demonstration on human stress responses." Before Zixel could formulate a response that adequately conveyed the sheer insanity of that idea, Dean Zorix's voice boomed across the cafeteria. "Sar of Earth," the Dean's voice reverberated with the force of a small sonic weapon, causing several nearby crystalline students to vibrate uncomfortably. "My office." "Now, Bo." Sarah straightened her posture and saluted smartly, a gesture that was completely lost on the fuming Dean II captain. "I mean, yes, Dean Zorix right away. Dean Zorix, just let me grab Mr. Whisk. Leave. The hamster." Sarah's face fell slightly, but she recovered quickly. "Right, of course, probably for the best. Wouldn't want to cause another interspecies incident, although technically I think we're already well past that point, so really." "Whoa, Sarah." Going. Sarah turned to Zixel with a wink. "Duty calls. Don't forget to feed Mr. Whiskers if I'm not back in a few days. And remember, no matter what you hear, it's all in the name of science." With that, she sauntered off towards the dean's office, leaving behind a wake of bemused and terrified onlookers. Zixel watched her go, a complex mix of emotions swirling through his neural networks. On one appendage, he was fairly certain he'd just witnessed the end of Sarah's academic career. On the other, he had a sneaking suspicion that this was far from the last he'd see of the chaotic human. As if to confirm his thoughts, Sarah's voice drifted back across the cafeteria. "Hey, Dean, quick question. How do you feel about a field trip to the sulfur pools of Venus? I promise it'll be educational." The dean's inarticulate roar of frustration was answer enough. Zixel sighed, his exoskeleton sagging slightly. "Cosmos, give me strength," he muttered, reaching out to pat Mr. Whiskers' containment sphere. "I have a feeling we're going to need it." And so, as the Galactic University's emergency response protocols kicked into high gear and Sarah prepared to face the consequences of her uniquely human approach to education, life in the cosmos continued. A little more chaotic, perhaps. A little more exciting, certainly. But isn't that what happens when you invite a Deathworlder to class? In the grand tapestry of the universe, it was just another day at Galactic University. And somewhere, in the vastness of space, the dust mites and fleas of Earth silently celebrated their newfound fame. Or is it just the beginning?